and we'll get started. If you all have any problems hearing or anything, please let us know. Hopefully we won't have any issues though at all with any of that.
Welcome to the Kentucky Private Applicator Training Certification Program. By completing this training, you will be allowed to buy and apply restricted use and general use pesticides to produce any ag commodity. Applications can be made on the property that you own or lease and/or the lands of your employer. However, products containing paraquat and some dicamba products require additional training and certifications. You can apply pesticides to the land of a farmer neighbor without compensation other than trading personal services. And with this certification, you can annually train workers to satisfy worker protection standards. Your private applicator certification is valid for 3 years and expires on December 31st of the 3rd year. This program can be customized to fit your agricultural operation, including grains, tobacco, pasture, fruits, vegetables, and greenhouses. Certified private pesticide applicators are expected to have practical knowledge of common pests and their damage. They should be able to read and understand the pesticide labeling information, including the common names of pesticides applied, pests to be controlled, timing and methods of applications, safety precautions, and any pre-harvest or re-entry restrictions, and any specific disposal procedures. You should know how to follow label instructions and warnings to be able to prepare concentrations and calibrate application equipment, to be able to recognize local environmental situations that must be considered during application to avoid contamination, recognize poisoning symptoms and procedures to follow in case of a pesticide accident, know and follow the rules of record keeping for pesticides, understand and comply with the worker protection standards, and finally, store pesticides in accordance with the federal and state laws and regulations. After completing this training, you will be issued a private applicator's card with your certification number. You will need this card to purchase restricted use pesticides. While there is a list of current certified applicators posted online by county in Kentucky, and it indicates when their certification will expire, the Personal Information Security Act does not allow posting of the state-issued identification numbers. You are the only one who can provide this number directly to pesticide dealers, and they are required to have these numbers for their sales records. You must record all pesticide applications of both general and restricted use pesticides within 14 days of the date of application. Kentucky requires that these records be maintained for 3 years. Commercial custom applicators must provide you with a copy of any application they've made within the last 30 days of treatment. In 2017, a pollinator protection plan was developed through the leadership of the Kentucky Department of Agriculture and many other organizations and agencies. The plan includes best management practices for beekeepers, pesticide applicators, and landowners, as well as a communication tool which could be used by applicators to alert nearby beekeepers when an application will be made, as required by certain pesticide labels. The Worker Protection Standard is an EPA-administered regulation to reduce pesticide exposure among agricultural workers and pesticide handlers. Agricultural workers and pesticide handlers must be trained each year before they begin their work, and there is no grace period. There are 3 parts to this: informing workers and handlers about pesticide safety, providing protection from potential exposures to pesticides, and mitigating exposures that do occur. Anyone except for family members employed, including self-employed, for any type of compensation by an agricultural establishment or a commercial pesticide establishment that uses pesticides in the production of plants on a farm, forest, nurseries, or greenhouses is covered by WPS. These rules apply to the owners and employers on these types of agricultural and pesticide handling establishments. WPS requirements must be followed whenever there is an agricultural use requirement box on the label of the pesticide that is being applied. The WPS protections covers two types of employees, pesticide handlers and agricultural workers. Pesticide handlers are those who mix, load, or apply agricultural pesticides, handle open pesticide containers, clean or repair pesticide application equipment, enter enclosed treated areas before ventilation requirements have been met, dispose of pesticides or containers, or assist in the application of pesticides. Agricultural workers are those that perform hand labor tasks in pesticide-treated crops or lands. This includes various types of activities, including harvesting, pruning, thinning, and trellising of plants. Here are some things that you can do to comply with the worker protection standards. Ensure that all pesticide handlers and early entry workers are at least 18 years old. Post warning signs for all pesticide applications with a restricted entry interval, or REI, of more than 48 hours. Provide safety data sheets along with pesticide application information at the central display site. And provide emergency eye wash systems at pesticide mixing and loading sites. Provide the new pesticide safety poster at the central display location at decontamination sites. Implement application exclusion zones by keeping workers and other people away from the application equipment and treatment areas during pesticide applications. This is at least 100 feet from ground application equipment. Provide respirator fit testing, training, and medical evaluations that conform with OSHA standards for any handler required by pesticide labeling to wear a respirator. Some pesticides require the use of a respirator, as these pesticides pose an inhalation risk. Most pesticides do not require a respirator. When using those pesticides requiring a respirator, applicators must use the approved respirators to meet the specific requirements listed on the label. There are many different types of respirator requirements which differ based on the types of pesticides and the risks they pose. Before selecting and using a respirator, applicators must be cleared to use a respirator by a doctor, as respirators can make it more difficult to breathe while you are working. A medical clearance is needed every 2 years. Applicators must also be fit tested for the models of respirators they will use. This must be done each year. A poorly fitting respirator does not provide the level of protection needed. Fit testing must meet OSHA 29 CFRR 1910.134 standards. Medical clearance and fit testing records must be kept for 3 years. There's a lot of information to familiarize yourself with. On the UK Pesticide Safety Education Program information page, you can find the Applying Pesticides Correctly core manual, as well as links to training materials in Spanish.
Okay, next we will move into our pollinator protection. Hold on just a second, I'll get that one started.
My name is Rick Besson. I'm an extension entomologist at the University of Kentucky. I'm in the entomology department, and I work with farmers across the state. Pollinators face a lot of threats when it comes to their numbers. Generally, we feel that pollinators have declined over the last decade or more. We notice that with farmers having to bring in managed pollinators more than they used to, just because they can't rely on the wild pollinators as much. The reasons for these declines can be a number of things. It can be pathogens affecting managed and wild pollinators. It can be pesticides. It can be changes in weather and climate. There's a number of factors that can be contributing to this, but we rely on pollinators. And in an era where pollinators are less reliable, that creates a lot of issues for farmers. It's just as important to conserve wild pollinators as it is to rely on managed pollinators. We have a very diverse state. We're fortunate in our state. We have a lot of areas around our agricultural fields where there usually are numerous wild pollinators. Wild pollinators can pollinate a wide variety of plants and crops. They're very valuable. But with wild pollinator decline, farmers are relying more heavily on bringing in managed pollinators for specific crops. This creates some issues in terms of expense for the growers, as well as the availability of managed pollinators at specific times of the year.
There's also more information on pollinator protection, ways to check to see if people are applying pesticides in an area that has pollinators, or if you're applying, you can get on and do it on this website as well. We can get you more information on that as well. Next, we'll move into pesticide storage. Hold on just a second as I share my video.
Extension Associate in the Pesticide Safety Education Office at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Improper pesticide storage can be hazardous to human health and the environment. Follow these guidelines for storing pesticides safely and securely. Store pesticides in locked, well-ventilated locations away from water, such as lakes or streams. Post danger signs and secure your building to keep unauthorized people out. Buy only what you need and don't stockpile. Always use your oldest pesticides first. Keep an inventory of stored pesticide products, as this will help in your decision making. Store pesticides in their original containers and out of reach of children. So this means do not put them into things like soda containers or things like that that children might be attracted to. Store other materials such as food, feed, or supplies separately from where pesticides are stored so that these items do not get contaminated from pesticides. Keep and follow all of your pesticide labels, as these can indicate temperature requirements or storage requirements for the pesticides. Make sure that your storage facility is kept neat and has sturdy shelves, metal works really well, and that they don't leak. Put liquid and more toxic pesticides on lower shelves, as this will help in case there's a spill. So for instance, we have a skull and crossbones poison labeled pesticide here that's on the bottom floor. So if that would spill, it wouldn't go very far. Also, you want to keep like your granular pesticides, those can be kept higher up, and then your liquid pesticides on a lower shelf. By following these guidelines, you will be able to protect yourself and the environment from pesticide spills.
All right, next we'll have a pesticide label PowerPoint, and I will get that one started. It will be a voiceover of a PowerPoint that I did today, so hang on just a second. Using and understanding pesticide labels. The information attached to the pesticide container is the label, and this is a legal document. You're required to follow all the directions with the label. Remember, the label is the law. No pesticide can be sold in the United States until the EPA has determined that the use of the product will not represent an unreasonable risk to humans or environment. The label has all the information needed for safe and effective use of the product and is supported by research data supported and supplied from the manufacturer. For use in Kentucky, pesticides must be registered with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. The classification of pesticides falls under two areas. The EPA will categorize every pesticide as either general use or restricted use. Most often, certain active ingredients inside pesticides, which are considered more hazardous, are classified as restricted use. However, with some active ingredients, certain formulations are restricted use and other formulations of the same product are not. Restricted use pesticides have the potential to harm humans or the environment unless they are applied by certified applicators who have the training to use these pesticides safely and effectively. When a pesticide is classified as restricted use, there will be a box at the top of the front label, as you can see in the example here. Usually another statement will accompany this and will let you know who can buy and use the product. On the parts of the pesticide label, there are many parts to the pesticide label which are grouped under headings to make the information easier to find. Some information is required by the EPA to appear on the front panel. Other information may be located elsewhere on the label or within the labeling. Some of them have many pages, some have a few. So it's easy to look over things, but you need to make sure that you look thoroughly throughout the entire label. The brand name is usually at the top. This is a name that is used in advertising, so be careful when you're selecting pesticides by the brand name, as minor variations may designate very different chemicals. The active ingredients section lists what is in the product, including the percentages. The official chemical name and/or common name for each active ingredient must be listed. The chemical name is complex that describes the chemical and its structure. Common names are simpler and are officially accepted by the EPA. By checking the common or chemical names, you will always be sure to get the right active ingredient. The EPA registration number is used with record-keeping requirements and is also found on the front of the label. It's used in case of poisoning, claims of misuse, or liability claims. The first set of numbers, as you see on this label example here, the 264, identifies the company. The second set, the 1141, identifies the specific product. Some products will tell you what kind of formulation the product is. The formulation may be named, or the label may show only an abbreviation such as WDG, which is for water dispersible granule, could be SC for suspension concentrate, or EC for emulsifiable concentrate. Each container must also indicate the name and address of the manufacturer and the amount of product in the container with net contents. Every label has a statement, "Keep out of the reach of children." The signal word indicates the risk of acute effects from the 4 routes of exposure to a pesticide product. They'll either be oral, dermal, inhalation, or eye. And based on one that is greatest, the 3 signal words are danger, warning, or caution. Danger signals you that the pesticide is highly toxic and is very likely to cause acute illness from oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure, or to cause severe eye or skin irritation. All highly toxic pesticides that are likely to cause acute illness through oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure also will carry the word poison written in red in the skull and crossbones symbol. Products that have the signal word danger due to skin and eye irritation potential will not carry the word poison or the skull and crossbones symbol. Warning signals you that the product is moderately likely to cause acute illness from oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure, or that the product is likely to cause moderate skin or eye irritation. Caution signals you that the product is slightly toxic or relatively non-toxic. The product has only slight potential to cause acute illness from oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure, And skin or eye irritation it would cause, if any, is likely to be slight. Most pesticide products are required to include instructions on how to respond to emergency exposure. This includes first aid measures and may also include instructions to seek medical help. The hazards to humans and domestic animals section will contain statements that indicate which route of entry, whether it be mouth, skin, eyes, lungs, you must particularly protect against, and what specific action you need to take to avoid acute effects from pesticide exposure. Included in this section will be potential to cause delayed effects such as tumors, reproductive problems in lab animals, or allergic effects due to repeated exposure. You may not think you will need this section, but I have to say we actually used it this summer once whenever one of our dogs got into some old bottles of poison, some type of poison, acid, something, and we did have to call one of the numbers. Personal protective equipment statement tell you the minimal personal protective equipment that you must wear when using the pesticide. Sometimes the statements will require different personal protective equipment for different pesticide handling activities. Some information may provide on how to wash and clean your PPE. Environmental hazards section indicates the precautions for protecting the environment. Most pesticide labeling, for example, will warn you not to contaminate water when you apply the pesticide or when you clean your equipment or dispose of pesticide waste. The labeling will contain a specific precautionary statement if the pesticide poses a specific hazard to the environment. So for example, it may warn you that the product is highly toxic to pollinators or endangered species, or may threaten ground or surface water in some situations. Many pesticide labels have a section on physical or chemical hazards. If there are no unusual physical or chemical hazards, there may be no statement in the labeling. Under the directions for use, every label states the following. It is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with this labeling. This means it is illegal to use a pesticide in any way not permitted by the labeling. The pesticide may be used only on the plants, animals, or sites named in the directions for use. You may not use higher dosages, higher concentrations, or more frequent applications. You must follow all directions for use, including directions concerning safety, including the PPE, mixing, diluting, storage, and disposal. The use directions and the instructions are not advice, they are requirements. Remember again, the label is the law. Most agricultural insecticides will have an entry statement with precautions about entering a treated area after application. This statement will tell you how much time must pass before people can enter a treated area except under special circumstances. This is called the restricted entry interval, or the REI. This is the minimum amount of time between the end of the application and workers can enter the treated area without restrictions. In this example, it is 4 hours for Kentucky. The directions for use section also includes general product information, mixing and application instructions, potential incompatibility testing and concerns, use restrictions, pest and disease resistance management guidelines, chemigation requirements, drift management, and restrictions with rotational crops. All pesticide labeling contains some instructions for storing the pesticide. Pesticides vary in their storage requirements. With this example, the product should be stored in a dark, cool, and dry place where the temperature stays between 14 degrees and 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Pesticide labeling also contains some general information about how to dispose of excess pesticide in the pesticide container in ways that are acceptable under federal regulations. There may be instructions on how to prepare containers for disposal when the product is finished. It's also probably a good idea to maybe check with your local extension agent to see if the Kentucky Department of Agriculture will be in your area for rinse and recycling type exceptions to label instructions. There are 5 types of exceptions as listed here on the screen, allow you to use pesticides in some ways that are not specifically mentioned in the labeling. You are able to use less than the label states or use the product less frequently. However, this often is contrary to resistance management concerns and should be done with caution. The product may fail to perform as needed when used at a lower rate. You are able to target pests not on the label so long as the animal, plant, or site is covered by the labeling. However, as with using lower rates, use against the pest on the label may result in unsatisfactory control. You are free to use equipment or methods of application so long as they are not prohibited by the labeling. For example, some labels prohibit the use of aerial application or chemigation. All right, so now we're going to do a little practice quiz on a label. Here on the left-hand side, you will see, and this will be throughout the entire little quiz we're doing here. I'm walking through. The left side will always be the full page of the label. So this here, you'll see the full page of page 1. And on the right side, I'll do more of a zoomed in where the answer will be found on that page, so you get a little bit closer to it. So what is the common name of this product? That's going to be the dilithium. That is going to always usually be found under the active ingredients, the one that's best known for. Is this product restricted use and why? Again, on the front of the label, it's going to usually have a very noticeable on it. Here it's at the very top, a restricted use pesticide. So it's easily found on the front of the label. What is the EPA registration number for Blasta? Again, going to be located on the front page. Here you'll see the EPA registration number is 1234567. What is the emergency number to call treatment information? Again, this will be found on the front of the label. You want to be able to access this quickly in case of anything happening. Hotline number here, 1-800-331-3148 for emergency medical treatment information. You may call this number, and it also may that your doctor may want to call this, or the EMS. Is the product highly, moderately, or slightly toxic? Again, on the front of the label, it says right here, warning. So we automatically know it's moderately toxic. It's going to have effects through one of the manners that we discussed earlier. What additional PPE must handlers exposed to concentrates use that a handler only exposed to dilute mixtures through application is not required to use? So here on the front of the label, you'll see personal protective equipment. You'll see the handlers who may be exposed to dilute through application or other tasks must wear, and this has long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves such as the barium laminate, nitrile rubber, neoprene, shoes plus socks. And then the next section, you'll see handlers who may be exposed to the concentrate through mixing, loading, and application or other tasks must wear. They'll list all those things. And then after you see shoes plus socks, you'll see protective eyewear. So that is the addition. Is a product toxic to pollinators? Again, I found this on page 2, so it's important to read through your entire label. You'll see here under the environmental hazards, this product is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds while bees are actively visiting the treatment area. What are the temperature requirements for storage for long periods of time? Again, page 2 of the label. It is found under storage and disposal. You'll see here, do not freeze, do not allow to be under a certain degree. So, very important. What is the restricted entry interval for agricultural workers? Again, this is page 2. You'll see here, agricultural use requirements. Do not enter or allow worker entry into treated areas during the restricted entry interval of 12 hours. What are the restrictions for rotational crops? Found this on page 3 of the sample under rotational crops. Crops for which viniferin tolerance exists may be rotated at any time. All other crops may be rotated 30 days following the final application. All right, that's the end of the pesticide label PowerPoint. Next, we will do a video on pesticide PPE and cleaning. So hold on a second and I will get that one shared.
I'm Emily Doran, Extension Assistant in the Pesticide Safety Education Program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Using personal protective equipment, or PPE, reduces the risk of pesticide poisonings for you as an applicator. Some sort of PPE is required by most pesticide labels. You have a lot of options when it comes to PPE, so how do you know what to use? The best place to start is by reading the pesticide label for specific PPE requirements. Let's take a few minutes to look at different types of PPE and how to learn to properly use them. PPE requirements will vary from label to label, and some may not have requirements at all. If the label doesn't have any PPE, we recommend at a minimum wearing a long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks, and shoes. You could also wear a disposable coveralls like a Tyvek suit to protect your legs and arms. Gloves should also be worn even if it's not listed on the label. When it comes to gloves, there are a variety to choose from, and you have to pick the right type for the job to reduce your risk of exposure to pesticides. Here we have gloves not to wear. Latex and polyethylene do not offer enough protection, and lined gloves can absorb the pesticide and continually expose you as you apply it. What you should wear is unlined, chemical-resistant gloves. We recommend nitrile, neoprene, and butyl. In general, the thicker the glove, the more protection it has. So far, the options I've shown have all been reusable gloves that would need to be properly cleaned after each use. However, there are chemical-resistant disposable gloves like this nitrile glove. The advantage of disposable gloves offer is that there is no need to wash after each use. Instead, you can simply throw them away. Keep in mind, the thicker the disposable glove, the better protection too. The type of PPE required may be different depending on what you are doing with the pesticide. Those involved in the mixing and loading process often have higher PPE requirements than those applying pesticides. This is because mixer and loaders are exposed to concentrated pesticides, while those applying the pesticides and cleaning equipment may be exposed to diluted pesticides. In addition to the minimum PPE requirements we've just discussed, an apron, safety glasses, or face shield and respirator may be required. Some things to remember about choosing an apron. When you work with highly toxic pesticides, it needs to be chemical resistant and should cover the entire front of your body from your chest to above your knees. The safety glasses must have brow and side guards and fit properly to protect your eyes. You can also use safety glasses that easily fit over your eyeglasses. Another option for protecting eyes is a face shield. A face shield prevents pesticides from coming in contact with your eyes as well as your entire face. There are a number of different types of respirators. We will be focusing today on half-face cartridge respirators. This half-face cartridge respirator prevents you from inhaling the chemical when applying pesticides. This black organic vapor cartridge is required for filtering out pesticides. When applying pesticide, dust, or granules, place the dust covers over the cartridges. These come with the respirator. Store mask and cartridges in Ziploc bag to keep them in good condition and the mask clean. Replace cartridges as needed, such as after 8 hours of continuous use. Do seal checks and ampule testing before each use to ensure proper fit and to determine if the cartridges are fitting properly. Be sure to clean respirators after each use to remove pesticide residue. Read each pesticide label for the specific requirements for mixer and loader and applicators. There are other PPE items that can be useful for applicators in specific situations. Items like rubber boots for use in turf application situations where you may be walking through the treated area, head covering when making applications above your head like spraying trees or tall vegetation or hanging plants in a greenhouse. After the pesticide application, it is important to properly clean your PPE and yourself. Use soap and water to clean all of your PPE before you store it for the next use. Also, be sure to wash yourself with soap and water as soon as possible after the application. The most important thing to remember about PPE is that you have to use the appropriate equipment for each job. You can purchase these items at many locations. For a list of suppliers, refer to the NEB Guide on protective clothing and equipment for pesticide applicators. As always, remember to read the label for specific PPE requirements for each product.
Okay, and next we will move on to respirators. So I will get that video started now.
Some pesticides, which pose breathing hazards, require use of respirators when mixing loading, during application, or when cleaning equipment after application. Repeated unprotected exposure to these materials can weaken or damage otherwise healthy lungs. This can result in the loss of energy, shortness of breath, a persistent cough, or tightness in the chest. This video addresses how to properly use a respirator when required with some types of pesticide applications. I will cover the requirements for using respirators when pesticide applications require their use, the types of respirators used for pesticide applications, how to conduct a seal test, and how to maintain and store your respirator. Pesticides that require respirators include some insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and even some organically approved pesticides. But keep in mind that many pesticide products do not require the use of respirators. While this video focuses on respirators, it's a requirement to use all personal protective equipment, or PPE, listed on the pesticide label. In order to determine if a pesticide requires the use of a respirator and during which operations, you must read the Personal Protective Equipment, or PPE, section of the pesticide label you plan on using. This is near the beginning of the label in the precautionary statement section. If there's no mention of a respirator, then none is required. If a respirator is required, you need to select the correct type of respirator. Pesticide labels specify the types of respirators using NIOSH TC designations. Some pesticides only require respirators for some mixing and loading or application activities. With this label, pesticides are required for all pesticide handling activities. It's important to match the correct type of respirator with the pesticide you'll be using, as different respirators protect against different types of products. A common category of respirator is the TC84A, as with this example. This is a particulate filter. These filters are often rated as N, R, or P, referring to their resistance to oil. N is not resistant, R is resistant, and P is highly resistant to oils. The numbers 95, 99, or 100 refer to the percentage of airborne particulates they remove. For example, the respirator on the right is an N95. It removes 95% of the particles, but is not resistant to oils. A TC23C is designed to remove organic vapor contaminants from the air, but you must be sure to use the correct type of cartridge for organic vapors. Some labels will also require a particulate pre-filter when using this type of respirator. These are attached on top of the cartridges. The respirator on the left is an example of this. No one type of filter protects against all types of pesticide contaminants. You should make a list of the pesticide products you'll be using and check for their respirator requirements. Check each label for its PPE requirements. Before anyone can use a respirator, they must have a medical evaluation by a licensed healthcare professional. This is to make sure they can use a respirator while working without putting their health at risk. This must be done before a fit test is conducted and is at no cost to employees. The licensed healthcare provider will provide a written medical determination, and this record must be kept for at least 2 years for each employee. Persons using tight-fitting type respirators must have an annual fit test for each model of respirator they will be using. While powered air purifying respirators do not require an annual fit test, non-powered air purifying respirators require an annual fit test. These respirators must have a tight seal around the face to prevent leaks. Human faces vary in shape and size, and so do models and sizes of respirators. Fit tests ensure that the mask does not leak air when in use. Generally, tight-fitting respirators will work only on clean-shaven faces. Applicators wanting to keep beards and other facial hair should use powered air-purifying respirators where a tight seal is not as important. All fit tests must conform to OSHA-approved standards and must be conducted annually. As people age, lose, or gain weight, their faces change in shape, so the sizes and models of respirators that fit their face may change. A written record of the fit test must be kept for at least 2 years and is required to include name of the applicator tested, the type of fit test performed, make, model, and size of respirator approved for the applicator, date of the fit test, and the results of the fit test. Each time a tight-fitting respirator is used, a seal check is done to ensure it is in place correctly. This can be done by blocking the exhalation valve with your hand and breathing out gently, or by covering the inlet openings with the palms of your hand and inhaling gently. If you feel air leaking with either test, reposition the respirator and repeat the steps until you have an effective seal. Remember that facial hair may interfere with the seal and is not permitted with tight-fitting respirators. Remember, a seal check is not the same as a fit test. Fit tests are performed annually. A seal check is done every time you use a tight-fitting respirator. Employers are responsible to train their employees on the proper use and care of their respirators. This is done annually and should include explaining when and why respirators are needed, how to select, install, and when to change cartridges, how to put on, check the seal, and remove respirators, how to recognize what to do if a respirator fails, how to inspect, maintain, and store respirators, and how to recognize medical symptoms that may limit the ability to use a respirator while you are working. Employers must keep records of respirator training for at least 2 years. This should include name of the trainer, name of the trainees, date of the training, and the topics covered during the training. Reusable respirators must be cleaned after each use. Carefully follow the manufacturer's cleaning instructions. Respirators shared by coworkers must be cleaned and disinfected before they can be shared. It's important to thoroughly air dry respirators to prevent mold development before storing them in plastic bags. Respirators should be stored in a clean, dry place away from sunlight and extreme temperatures. Respirators have a working lifespan that can vary with the environment they're used in. In general, particulate filtering respirators must be replaced when resistance to breathing becomes excessive, when the filtering elements are damaged or torn, according to the manufacturer's instructions, according to pesticide labeling, or at the end of 8 hours of cumulative use. With respirators that remove gas or organic vapors, the cartridges must be replaced at the first indication of taste, odor, or irritation, when resistance to breathing becomes excessive, according to the manufacturer's instructions, according to pesticide labeling, or at the end of 8 hours of cumulative use. For more information on respirator reuse, I would recommend you get a copy of the Worker Protection Standard Respiratory Protection Guide available through PERC, the Pesticide Education Resources Collaborative.
All right, next, we'll take a small little break here real quick to see if anybody has any questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can put it in the chat box or come off mute before we move on to our next video. All right, since it doesn't seem like we have any questions, we'll move on. Our next video will be the jar test.
Mixing pesticides can often be convenient and economical to do. Some products may even contain multiple pesticides. However, if these products are not compatible, it can cause issues such as poor distribution, clogged or damaged equipment, loss of pesticide efficacy, and increased toxicity to both plants and animals. Types of product compatibility include physical compatibility, which is when two pesticides react with another, producing a different compound and reducing the activity of the pesticide. Biological incompatibility, which is when two products that, when combined, create a phytotoxic effect on the plants. And a physical incompatibility, which can be a visual incompatibility that can make one or more products unstable or hazardous for application. Determining product compatibility is dependent on more than just the products being mixed. The water source, temperature, and how you mix your products can also play an important role. For example, municipal or city water can often be treated, resulting in a high pH. A higher pH can influence the chemical's period of activity and effectiveness. The pH can be tested by using a pH strip as seen here in this video. If the pH needs to be adjusted, you can do so by adding buffers. Water temperature may also prevent products from mixing properly or dissolving. As a general rule, if it is too uncomfortable to be outside, it is not a good time to be mixing a tank. Besides water, the order you mix your products can have a detrimental impact on your application. Some product labels will provide instructions on what order to mix your product, but if this is not the case, there is an acronym from BASF and other agrochemical companies that can be used. These are general guidelines that can be followed. Some manufacturers include this information on the product label. However, if you are unsure about the physical incompatibility, you can perform a jar test. A jar test is a simple way to test for multiple products' compatibility. If your product has a detailed way to do a jar test, I would recommend following that, but otherwise this demonstration would be a good place to start. To perform a jar test, you will first need to add a pint of water from the water source you intend to use for your field applications to a clean glass jar. Be sure to check that the pH and possibly adjust it to the recommended range for your product. After this, you will add the products to the jar in the order you intend to do in the field, making sure to stir or shake the mixture in between each newly added product. After the entire mixture is combined, feel the sides of the jar. If the jar is warm, this may suggest a chemical reaction is occurring between the products, and that may degrade or reduce your mixture's efficacy. If the products are compatible, the liquid will be smooth and free of lumps or particles. Unlike the example where we see a gummy buildup here, this type of incompatibility could cause equipment damage. Here are more examples of what you might see when your products are incompatible. You can see here the separation or other buildups that could cause damage to your tanks. When adding the products to the jar, follow the suggestion by the label. However, if there's no recommendation, you can follow this table. Jar tests evaluate physical compatibility, but it will not inform the biological compatibility or the plant's response to your mixture. Product labels can sometimes have this information, but not always. In the absence of this information, and if spraying a mixture you don't have experience with, use the jar test to spray a small test area of your crop. Possible phytotoxic effects should appear within 2 to 3 days, which could include shot holes in leaves, small circular bleach areas, or foliar tissue degrading between leaf veins.
Okay, next we'll move on to the record keeping PowerPoint. And then after that, we'll have a few more videos and then another PowerPoint. So hang on just a second. Pesticide record keeping. This module will help you understand the record keeping requirements for all private applicators. So why keep records of pesticide applications? Well, there's many great reasons. Many farmers or agricultural producers have been keeping pesticide records long before it was required for us to do so. Record keeping is a great part of the integrated pest management. It can help you reduce pesticide mistakes or misuse. Also, if a pest is not controlled, if damage has occurred in the targeted area, or if a pesticide has moved off target and caused problems, you may be able to determine a little bit better what went wrong. Records may help you to determine that a particular pesticide, a particular formulation, a type of application equipment, or some condition in the treatment area actually caused the problem. Good records can also help you better determine the exact amount of pesticides you'll need. Record keeping allows the applicator, you, to look long-term at the management of the products that you're going to use. This will help you make decisions on mode of action of rotations and on also the amount of particular products you will need to purchase annually. This helps to manage pesticide resistance and avoid over-purchasing some products which don't store well over time. So ultimately, improving your profit and cutting down on the things that hurt your back wallet. Pesticide records also provide you proof of proper pesticide use and compliance with the label. Remember, the label is the law, and it's always great that you keep records showing that you have done everything that the label has stated. If there's ever a question or complaint about a pesticide application, the first step will be to check the applicator's records. They provide you with the information to use in response to the claim of excess residues or damages, and also can be helpful for medical staff if the need should arise. The record keeping requirements vary a little bit. As you can see here on this screen, the requirements for pesticide record keeping fall under both state and federal law. Each of these have some different requirements, but you must comply with each of them. In the 1990 Farm Bill, it stated that all private applicators are required by law to keep records of their federally restricted use pesticide applications on record for 2 years. The EPA Worker Protection Standards require records must be kept for 30 days after the end of a restricted entry interval for the respective pesticide. There are some exceptions to that. For agricultural owners in family farm situations, they're not required to record this information for themselves or members of their immediate family, but the information must be recorded if an employee is from outside the immediate family. The types of information kept for worker protection standards does differ a little bit from the required USDA requirements. Finally, Kentucky law states that private and commercial pesticide applicators maintain records for all pesticide applications for 3 years. So make sure that you definitely keep your records at least a minimum of 3 years. USDA and KDA representatives have the legal right to review records at any time. First responders, including doctors, EMS, and fire personnel, must also be able to review these records. So it's important to keep good records. For every restricted use application, you need to record the following information, as you can see on the list here. From the pesticide label, you'll need to record the brand name and the EPA registration number, which can be found on the front of the label. We'll look at a label here shortly, and we'll point out where you can find different things. You need to record the date and the location of the application. The location of the application may be the name of a field or the GPS coordinates. You cannot just put your farm's address. Record what was treated, the type of crop or commodity, the product or site. Record the size of the area treated, so how many acres, and total amount of product used. And then finally, record the name of the applicator and their certification number. The worker protection standards do require a few additional things that we stated before. So for worker protection standards for record keeping, you will need to add in for those records for all applications, not just restricted use, but you'll have to have the brand name, EPA registration number, and location of application, which is all part of the USDA requirements. And then you'll also need to add in the start and end time of the application, record the active ingredient, and restricted entry interval for the product. Here on the little chart, you can see the additional things. We also have some additional requirements for the state. It is required that you do record the application information within 14 days of the application. And again, how many of us can remember what we did yesterday? So it's just important for us to go ahead at the time that we're doing it, record it, because otherwise we may forget. I know I certainly would. You'll need to keep these records for 3 years, as we stated a couple of slides ago. And for anyone who contracts applications, then you would need to record the name and address of the person receiving the service. You then must give that customer a copy of the records within 30 days of application. Here you'll see an example record keeping form. This form will comply with the state, USDA, and the Worker Protection Standards record keeping requirements. The columns from field number through chemical type are all filled out for every applicator, and the last 3 columns are filled in for farms that need to comply with the Worker Protection Standards. The first column is field number or name of the field. So for example, this could be Heel Field, field number 5, whatever is going to be the easiest for you to identify that field. I'm certain that we all have names for the field so that we can always identify them. The 4th column is what was treated. So it's whatever the crop or whatever was there. So for example, was it the soybean field or was it stored corn? Rates can be entered on a per acre basis or another unit based on how the rate appears on the label. The volume of water or carrier per acre refers to how much diluted materials is applied per acre. For example, this could be 23 gallons per acre. The purpose of application could be general weed control or targeting a particular disease or insect problem. And then for chemical type, you can circle G or R, and this will indicate whether it's a general or restricted use pesticide. For time of application, you need to indicate the start and finish time of the application. So let's just look at an example here. It's 7 p.m. today, and you just finished treating a 10-acre cornfield on the hill for stink bugs with a low rate of Blastum 2EC. It took you 4 hours to do the job, and you sprayed a total of 200 gallons of diluted spray. Fill out the record-keeping form as you would for this application, as if you have 4 employees and need to comply with worker protection standards. So, just looking at what all we need to fill in, we're just going to break it down section by section. So for this first section, we want to put in our field number. Again, this is just going to be how you're easily going to be identifying it. So in the example, I thought an easy way to identify it would be, it said it was a cornfield on the hill. So I've just got field number 1, corn on the hill. The date of application, we're applying it today. So at the time of this recording, it's 2/18/21. So that would be the date I would apply in this box. For the applicator name, it states in the example that you are the applicator. So it'd be your name and your certification number. So I'm just using my name and then a little example number. For the crop product treated, we can tell in the example that it's corn. And for the size of the area, it is 10 acres. We finished treating a 10-acre cornfield on the hill. Moving on to the next section of information on the record keeping form, we'll look at the product name. Where do we find the product name? We find it on the label, the first page of the label. So we can see here that's the Blastum 2EC. The registration number, the EPA registration number, is also found on the front of the label. And here you can see in the red rectangle on the little blurb of the example we have here, the EPA registration number is 12345567. Moving on to the total amount applied. You'll see here, I pulled this little field corn blurb off of page 3 of the label. So you have to look at your label, all sections of it, to be able to find some of this information for your record keeping. So total amount applied. So we have a 10-acre field. It says we're applying the low rate. So we want to look at the low rate on the label, and it says 2.1 through 6.4. So we know that we want to apply 2.1 fluid ounces per acre. If we have 10-acre field, we would just multiply that 2.1 times the 10 acres, and we'll come up with that 21 ounces. And then for the rate per acre, you'll see it's the 2.1 ounces. Moving on to the next section of the record keeping form, we'll put in the volume of water a carrier per acre. So we know that we have applied 200 gallons of diluted spray on our 10 acres. So we would just take that 200 gallons divided by the 10-acre field to see how many gallons per acre we applied. And we would get the 20 gallons per acre. The purpose of the application, again, you can read in our example here, we're treating a 10-acre cornfield on the hill for stink bugs. So here I'll put stink bug control. And then for the chemical type, if it's general or restricted use, you would find this information on the front of your label. And here you can see in the red box on the label, it says restricted use pesticides. So we would circle the R. And for the last section, this is for the worker protection standards. We would put in the restricted entry interval. This I found under the agricultural use requirements on page 2 of the label. Here you'll see it in the red rectangle, and it's 12 hours. The time of application, and here we do need to add the start time and the end time, but we do know we ended at 7 p.m. and it took us 4 hours. So we would need to actually put the whole time slot here, but at least put the time when you ended, because you know you cannot have anyone enter that field for 12 hours because you ended at 7 p.m. No one can get in there until 12 hours after you finished applying the product. And for the active ingredients, you will also find this on the front of your label. And you'll see here, I have the little blurb. Active ingredient is a doliprane. So you would add that into that part of the worker protection standard section, since we do have folks that we need to comply with that rule for. Okay, our next video will be on boom sprayer calibration. So I'll get it started.
Howdy, this is Larry Redmond, State Forage Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, bringing you a presentation on how to calibrate a boom sprayer. A lot of people are trying to convert their exotic grass pastures back to native prairie, trying to enhance wildlife habitat, especially for the northern bobwhite. So we need to learn how to properly calibrate the boom sprayer. And if we do that, then that will ensure that we get the proper application rate of that herbicide in the pasture. It's going to allow for us to correctly formulate the spray tank mixture, and it will provide for the most cost-effective treatment that we can get. Step 1 in calibrating the boom sprayer is to take a tape measure and simply determine the nozzle spacing between the spray nozzles. Record that number in inches. Step number 2, now we determine the length of the calibration course. We're going to drive the tractor and the sprayer through a specified length called the calibration course, depending on the nozzle spacing. And to determine that calibration course, we go through a little simple math. We'll take the nozzle spacing and divide that by 12. and then divide that number into 340. So if you look at the example there, took the 20-inch nozzle spacing, divided it by 12 inches, that gives us 1.67. We then take 340, divide by 1.67, and that gives us calibration course length in this particular example of 204 feet. Your calibration course, of course, could be different depending on nozzle spacing on your particular boom sprayer. Step number 3, now we measure and stake out the calibration course. You want to do this in the field where you're actually going to be spraying, because the field will actually determine the speed that you can drive through that field safely. So once you get your field and drive through the field and determine the safe speed that you can use, then you'll use the PTO RPM speed, and you will drive through that calibration course that you have marked off and record how long it takes to actually drive through that course in seconds. Turn the tractor around, come back through the same calibration course, measure that length of time, take an average of the 2 travel times, and use that for determining how much liquid is going to be coming out of the sprayer. Step number 4, we're going to park the tractor. We're going to maintain the same RPMs as we did going through the calibration course. Using clean water only, we're now going to turn on the sprayer and pick one of the nozzles, take a graduated cylinder, and catch the liquid that comes out of that nozzle for the same number of seconds that it took to drive through the calibration course. When we do that, we're going to look and see how many ounces of liquid we actually caught, and using this particular method of calibrating the sprayer, the ounces caught equals the gallons per acre that are being delivered to the field. And our target for that is going to be 15 to 20 gallons of liquid per acre. That ensures good coverage. If spraying more than 20 gallons or less than 15 gallons, we need to replace the nozzles so that they will deliver the correct amount. If we are spraying, say, 10 gallons per acre, we do not want to increase the pressure, for example, because this will reduce the droplet size and gives us more potential for off-target drift. And so the correct way is to set that pressure regulator at 20-25 pounds of pressure and leave it, and then adjust the nozzles so that we can deliver more or less liquid. Once we get all of the nozzles checked, we're going to take an average of those, and if we have any nozzles that are delivering 5% above or below the average, then we're going to replace those nozzles so that they're all delivering essentially the same amount. And we want to remember that using the correct amount of herbicide is important, not only to have a cost-effective control, but also because the label is the law.
Okay, the next video will be on nozzle selection.
Much time is spent selecting the most efficient product for crop protection. However, spray nozzles are a cheap component that may be as important as the products being sprayed. Proper selection of a nozzle type is essential to maximize application efficacy and to minimize off-target movement. Understanding simple concepts can get you a long way. At the end of this video, you should be able to: first, rapidly identify key features of common spray nozzles. Second, consult a nozzle manufacturer catalog. Third, understand how to get good coverage and reduce drift. Nozzles come in a wide variety of sizes and shapes. A universal alphanumeric code is adopted among manufacturers. This code provides rapid identification of key features. In this case, XR indicates the extended range series of TJET. The first three numbers indicate the angle of the spray fan, which is 110 degrees in this example. The two last numbers indicate the output at 40 psi. The output of this nozzle is 0.04 gallons per minute. V indicates it obeys a color coding system. Different colors indicate different outputs. S indicates the nozzle orifice is stainless steel. When it comes to spray patterns, the one-stage flat fans are still very common in agricultural applications. For decades, these were the only option on the market. However, one-stage nozzles present a huge problem, which is the combination of both fine and coarse droplets in the spray. As observed here, when the pressure increases from 40 to 60 psi, fine droplets show up at the edge of the pattern. Fine droplets can become suspended in the air and are the major cause of off-target movement due to particle drift. Two-stage nozzles, also called pre-orifice nozzles, introduce a smaller orifice prior to the exit orifice. This new feature allows a more stable pattern and reduces drift. A good example of a two-stage option is the air induction design. The pre-orifice allows for mixing air with the spraying solution, creating a coarser droplet spectrum. Coarser droplets, as seen here, drastically reduce the off-target movement of the product. Manufacturers' catalogs and phone apps provide valuable information for each nozzle type. Before utilizing these resources, consult your extension agent to determine the proper product rate, pressure, and speed for your application. These catalogs can be a good guide for nozzle selection. Suppose that you want to perform a herbicide application at 8 miles per hour with 20 inches between the nozzles in a boom. In order to achieve an output of 14.9 gallons per minute in this application, an XR 11004 would be adequate. Notice that changes in pressure do not linearly correlate with output. In other words, you will not double the gallons per acre output if you double your pressure. If you need to change the output of an application, consider changing the speed and even the nozzle type before working in wider ranges of pressure. Each product may require a specific nozzle type. For Fusarium head blight control, you should consider utilizing twin fans, which can protect both sides of the wheat head with fungicide. Drift from dicamba has been one of the major causes of injury to soybeans in the past few years. Dicamba labels were subjected to major changes and currently only allow nozzles that produce very coarse to ultra-coarse droplet sizes. The TJET TTI and Wilger DG are examples of approved nozzles for dicamba applications. Most applications require achieving a balance between good coverage and reduced off-target movement. Nozzles that produce fine and very fine droplets can increase coverage, but they also increase the risk of drift. Good coverage is mandatory for fungicidal applications and contact herbicides. In contrast, systemic products such as the herbicide Roundup are dependent on quality coverage to achieve control. Always consult product labels and your extension agent for specifics. In summary, remember what the color and the shape of a nozzle can tell you. Always refer to manufacturer catalogs and specialists, and consider the balance between coverage and off-target movement to maximize application efficacy.
Okay, in our next section, we'll move into the 10 common herbicide mistakes. And then following that, we'll do a PowerPoint. So hold on just a second.
Here are 10 common pesticide application problems. Pesticides are excellent crop production tools when used correctly, but control can be less than expected for a variety of reasons. Here are 10 common problems listed in no particular order. While the examples are herbicides, most problems also can occur with insecticides and fungicides. Weeds are too big. This is a common problem, especially when planting or post-emergence herbicide applications are delayed by weather. The label often states a range of weed sizes for which the herbicide will be effective and the recommended rates. If post-emergence herbicides are applied to weeds that are too large, then control can be greatly reduced, using a rate that is too high. In general, the ability to kill weeds or prevent weeds from growing while not damaging desired crops involves the ability of the crop to metabolize or break down the herbicide while the weed cannot. Under certain conditions, such as spray overlaps in the field or applications of very high rates, the crop's ability to detoxify the herbicide may be overwhelmed and crop injury can occur. Herbicide carryover. After application, herbicides are broken down by light, water, or soil microbes. Anything that affects these processes will slow down the breakdown of herbicides and can lead to carryover of residues from one crop to another, with potential injury to subsequent sensitive crops. Drought, low soil pH, and soils with low microbial activity are examples of factors that can increase the risk of carryover. Reduced residual control. In some cases, a soil-applied herbicide disappears more rapidly than normal. Warm, wet soils can mean increased microbial activity and faster breakdown. Leaching rains for extended periods of time can also lead to premature loss of residual activity of herbicides. Application rate that is too low. Control problems can be due to applying a herbicide at a rate that's not high enough for the particular soil conditions. It's important to read the label for soil restrictions and recommendations based on the texture of the soil and the percentage of organic matter that's present. No water to activate soil-applied herbicides. A herbicide that requires water to be activated will not work well if there's not enough rainfall or irrigation after application. Weeds are stressed. Post-emergence herbicides work poorly on weeds that are stressed or not growing normally. Stressed weeds partially shut down certain physiological activities, so the herbicide may not be taken up or moved to sites of action in the stressed plants. Improper adjuvant used. An adjuvant is any substance added to the pesticide spray tank to improve activity or application characteristics. The use of proper adjuvants is critical for many post-emergence herbicides. Their primary purpose is to reduce surface tension, improve wetting action, or increase the penetration of the pesticide into the plant. To choose the correct additive for a specific product, read the pesticide label. An appropriate adjuvant assures maximum performance and crop safety. The wrong adjuvant increases the risk of poor performance and crop injury. Application equipment. Sprayer problems such as clogged or worn nozzles, spray tank and lines not cleaned thoroughly after changing products, spray boom height that's too high or too low, or an improperly calibrated sprayer can all lead to problems. Inadequate agitation in the spray tank can be a problem as well. Any of these factors can lead to control problems or crop injury. Finally, and maybe first on the list, should be failure to read the pesticide label. If you don't read the label, you may apply the wrong product. Different brands and packaging can look very similar. You may not notice a change in rate or formulation of a product. The product may not control the pests you're targeting. Tank mixes may not be compatible. You may miss other important information, including directions for application that give information important for ideal and effective pest control.
Okay, and next we'll have Philip doing the PowerPoint on reducing pesticide exposure and other updates.
Well, good evening, everybody. Me and David Appleman are going to tag team this a little bit to kind of give you an update on pesticide safety. A study following over 8,000 pesticide users. The study conducted mainly of Japanese men, and it came out with some pretty startling information. 45% of those people that used pesticides on a regular basis had a higher heart attack rate. So that just kind of drives home the point that we need to be protecting ourselves. So now the question comes up, are the insecticides we're using as safe or safer, maybe more dangerous than some of the products we're using in the home? If you look at this chart, and this is the LD50, and basically what this means is the smaller bars means that they're more toxic. So if you'll look up there at the top, let me get my laser pointer. There we go. Up here at the top, we've got Bravo, which is an insecticide here, or sorry, a pesticide. And then Roundup. We've heard a lot of talk about Roundup into the news media with causing cancer and stuff like that. But if you look at the LD50, it's actually pretty safe. Move down here to white vinegar. White vinegar is actually more toxic than Roundup is. And then we've got Tylenol and Motrin. But you also want to pay down here close attention to where paraquat is. We've talked a lot about paraquat, and it's pretty highly toxic.
Philip, I think we may have lost you.
April, can you advance the slides or?
I cannot, but I didn't put it up here. Philip did. So let me see about ending his share and starting a new one here.
Okay.
Got 3 articles. That'll be good for. How do you do that?
Yeah, give us just a minute, folks. We'll get this started again. Philip's been dealing with a lot of ice over in eastern Kentucky, so he probably has lost his connection.
All right, can you see the screen now with pesticide update and safety?
Yes, it's on there. If you'll just advance to that slide where we were at.
I'm back.
Okay, Philip, you were breaking up during your presentation, so I'm afraid you may not have enough bandwidth or something.
Okay, well, I'll let you do the majority of it, and I'll fill in the gaps.
Okay, fantastic. Well, again, folks, we just want you to be aware of how many different pesticides have different levels of concern. We are going to be talking about some of those here in a minute that have high concern with their toxic effect. And this is not only for yourself, but your workers, your family members, and those around you, especially the environment as well, because this is important when it comes to using our pesticides correctly. Next slide. We've got different ways that Chemicals can be absorbed into our bodies, and there are a number of areas on our bodies that absorb chemicals differently and at different rates. So things such as our eyes, inhalation, ingestion, that's going to be 100% absorption. They're getting directly into our system. But other areas of our body, such as our hands, our palms, they are less likely to absorb chemical, but they're also one of the most problematic areas when it comes to chemical exposure. Next slide. So as you've seen with some of our recommendations, they're talking about a long sleeve shirt, possibly long pants, shoes, as needing to have the right personal protective equipment. But you know, when you start thinking about the area that you're going to be applying chemicals, you really have to think about how you're going to apply them. Are you looking at some kind of overhead application? Are the crops going to be taller that you need more protection? There's also poisoning symptoms that we want to be aware of. So if we do have an exposure, we might start feeling bad. Next slide, please. So here you see a lot of the different symptoms, and they often represent something similar to the flu. You're going to have fever, nausea, vomiting. You can also have diarrhea. You can have breathing problems. And then you can get into some other things such as muscle tremors, hypersalivation, eye problems, then cramps, consciousness, decreased consciousness, headaches. And as you get more and more problematic symptoms, you know you're getting in a condition where you need to be seeking medical help quickly. Next, please. So when it comes to first aid, the faster the chemical is washed off, the less injury we're going to have. So that's why it's important that we have clean water to wash off with if we do have a contamination. We especially need eye rinse in case of a contamination from our eyes, because we want to absolutely protect our eyes any way possible. And we definitely need to have a saline solution or something to rinse our eyes, or even just a clean running water hose. Next, please. So when it comes to providing first aid, you've got to be sure that you yourself are protected if you're helping someone. So you may need to wear a respirator if the area is contaminated. We need to move the victim to fresh air immediately if they're in an enclosed area or a place that's contaminated. Want to loosen tight-fitting clothing if they're having trouble breathing. We need to use artificial respiration if breathing stops. If convulsing, watch breathing carefully. You need to protect them from falling. So if they're dizzy or losing consciousness, we need to make sure that they don't fall down. And you want to keep the victim quiet and seek medical attention. Next, please. Now, if there is a swallowed pesticide, you must decide quickly if the victim should vomit. And this is very important. You need to check the label, because many of these chemicals have a caustic condition when it comes to the way they work, burning plants or possibly killing plants. So they may not want to induce vomiting. So you want to make sure if the victim is unconscious, you don't induce vomiting, or if it's a corrosive insecticide, never induce vomiting. You want to dilute it with something such as milk or water. Most of the time, you do not induce vomiting with EC or solution formulation concentrates. So you've got to have the label. This is why it's so important to have worker protection standards and have the material safety data sheet that comes with the pesticides available in case of a contamination. And we need to administer first aid. And then you also want to have that available to take to the emergency room and share that with the doctor. Next, please. So there's a lot of things you need to have on hand. Readily available, first aid kit, gloves, coveralls, emergency blanket, bottles of clean water, activated charcoal. This is a new one, can of evaporated milk, which is, again, to dilute and help reduce the effect of the chemical. Several bottles of eye wash, a gallon sealable plastic bag, single-use paper towels, simple bandages, and a bottle of soap to help wash things off. Next. And we've gone over the label, and it's extremely important that we have those labels available so we know what we're dealing with. Want to make sure that we've got that available, and when we know how to handle these chemicals, such as the one listed there, paraquat, it's got to be handled in a closed system. There's got to be a mandatory training and an age restriction. So we've got to keep that in mind as we're going along working with these new chemicals. Next, please. Now, when it comes to paraquat, we've got quite a few slides here because, as many of you know, we've used this for many years in our no-till production. It's a burn down chemical. It quickly kills and desiccates plants and weeds that are there prior to our no-till planting. But we know that paraquat has an extreme danger to human health. That paraquat is a product that has no antidote. Quite often, if you have a pesticide that you are contaminated with, if you go to the hospital, they can give you an antidote. And even though you're going to be sick, you're going to be in rough condition for a while, you may recover. When it comes to paraquat, if you have an ingestion of paraquat, there's no antidote, and you'll have major problems, if not death for sure. Next, please. So if you plan to use paraquat or gramoxone or any of the generic forms of this product in your pesticide application, in your management of your crop fields this year, you have to have a special training in order to use this. We'll have some information, as you see down here, the worker standards for paraquat. You have to go through that along with the training. So it all deals with mixing and loading, application, transporting, cleaning, excessive spray, but it mainly is to be used in a closed system, so we're not pouring it out of a jug. Next, please. When it comes to pesticides, there's a number of things that deal with the level of hazard that we have. Applicators working with concentrates. We've got products now that are ounces per acre, not the quarts per acre. So these are really highly concentrated products and can be very powerful in the use of killing weeds and things, but they can also have a very drastic effect if there is a contamination. So exposure through diluted applicators are next most likely to receive high exposure. Other exposures, things such as ruptured containers and spills, or getting into a field before it's past the restricted reentry interval. Go ahead. When it comes to our crops and things, we got to think about, again, what are we spraying? What's the situation like? So the fellow on the right, he is definitely outfitted for the most extreme, completely covered with a Tyvek suit. He's got gloves on, a respirator, eye protection, and even head protection. But he's spraying a knee-high crop. And so I wonder, does he really need that? Where the fellow here in the left picture is spraying a crop that is actually over his head. So does he properly protected? Does he need to have more of a type of suit that the fellow on the right has? So it depends on the chemical you're applying, the requirements of the chemical as far as PPE or personal protective equipment, and the the type of crop that you're spraying. Next, please. We've already gone over the personal protective equipment. The label's going to tell you what you really must have. And if it doesn't say on the label, we've gone over this: shoes and socks, long pants, long sleeve shirt, and gloves. Gloves are the most important part of your PPE because using gloves will reduce your chemical exposure by 90%. So following gloves and following the proper glove selection and use is the most important, but all the other requirements are definitely part of the program. A couple things I want to mention. It does say shoes, but you think about your shoes. If you get chemical spills on leather work shoes, or let's even say you're wearing tennis shoes, you're not going to throw those shoes away. You're probably going to keep them. But that leather is basically thick skin. It's going to soak into that leather. You're going to wear those hot, sweaty shoes for quite a few months probably. And you're going to have a low-level chemical exposure every day. So when we're applying chemicals, it's better to have rubber boots and or shoe covers if you're going to wear your leather shoes. So think about that next time you're out spraying. You don't want to throw away that brand new pair of high dollar leather boots. So it's better not to get them contaminated. Next, please. Again, we've talked about the gloves and what gloves work with certain types of chemicals. It will tell you on the label what type you need to use. So it's best to have the proper glove for the job and not one that possibly could actually dissolve in a very highly concentrated chemical. Next. And then the respirator, we've gone over those already. We need to make sure that we have respirators on hand for our planned applications for the coming year. And if you've got a respirator that has cartridges, go ahead and order new ones. I'll hear a lot of farmers say, oh, I hate to wear that respirator because it's so hard to breathe through. Well, if you have not changed those cartridges in 2 or 3 years, they're only good for 8 hours. So no wonder you can't breathe through it. And you need to make sure you're ordering the proper organic vapor cartridge for chemical vapors. Next. Again, this was already covered, and we want to make sure again that we get the right cartridges for the products that we're going to be applying. We've got many large producers that have started adding grain storage. So you'll possibly be in a grain bin, treating that for insects prior to filling the grain bins. So you'll be in an enclosed facility with limited air movement. You definitely need to have a respirator for this type of application, along with any chemical that requires it. So go ahead and plan for this and get that those materials, those supplies on hand. Next. And again, they've talked about this, and this is kind of new. This is something that we're just now learning about. It has been on the books for a while, but a medical clearance. And breathing through a respirator can be a challenge. And so you don't want to go out there and have, respiratory problems, heart problems that may be affected by breathing through this respirator. So you do need that medical clearance. So if you're going to get your yearly checkup, go ahead and have your medical provider write you a clearance for the use of a respirator. And that way you'll have that with your chemical record keeping system and with the requirements by the Kentucky Department of Agriculture and the EPA. So that way you'll be prepared for the use of a respirator. Next, please. Again, we've gone over the tight fitting respirators. We just don't want to make sure that they're still providing you the protection you need, make sure that we have them properly fitted. Next. They've already covered this with the seal. And so we've gone over the label and the signal words that we need to make sure we're checking on, because some of these chemicals require more observance when it comes to making sure we're covered with our PPE, making sure that our workers are properly trained when they're handling these types of chemicals, and making sure that anyone in the area understands and knows if we need to post that a field has been treated with these chemicals. So follow the label and make sure that we understand what we're absolutely using. Next. This is something that we want all producers to start considering, is rotation. We talk about this all the time because a lot of our chemicals, a lot of our insects and weeds are becoming resistant. And one of the reasons they're becoming resistant is we use the same chemical over and over again. Now, some people say, well, I used this chemical last year and I changed this year to a different one. But did you really change? Did you just change the brand name and you're still applying the exact same chemistry? What we have is the IRAC code, which is the number system on the chemicals that shows that we're changing the actual chemistry, the active ingredient in the chemical. So an example is Roundup. Roundup is a glyphosate product. There are dozens and dozens of generic forms of glyphosate. So if you change from one form to the other, you're not changing anything. All you're changing is the brand name. We need to change the chemistry of these products so we don't end up with resistance to weeds, to insects, or even fungi. And so a lot of these IRAC codes help you determine whether you're changing the chemistry from one product to the other. And we really encourage you to look at chemicals of different means of control to get the break in resistance. Next, please. The material safety data sheet. This is required to have on hand for worker protection standards. It's also extremely important in the case of a contamination, a spill, or something of that type, because this is what you would provide to emergency personnel. This would be what you would provide to the medical personnel in case someone has a contamination. This is what they need to have when it comes to treatment and understanding what the chemical was that caused the injury. So this is extremely important, and we've got to keep these on hand for the different products that we use. Next. So you can see different products have different levels of precautionary hazard statements. Some may be a little less concerning, others may be very concerning. An example, you go down to Lorsban, may be fatal if swallowed, because it is a very dangerous chemical, where something such as 7 harmful is swallowed and it's suspected of causing cancer. So it's not going to kill you right away, but repeated use without proper personal protective equipment could be something that you're exposed to over and over again with a product such as that could over time cause major problems. So each of these products lists the different characteristics that could be most concerning, whether it's respiratory, whether it's eye irritation or skin irritation, or as again with swallowed or inhaled, could be fatal. So be sure and watch that. Next. And more of the same with the different types of chemicals. Again, whether they're causing skin reactions, even symptoms such as drowsiness or dizziness, or damage to organs through repeated exposure. So again, things like contaminated shoes, or maybe even your gloves that have a hole in them that you're still using, that you still get repeated exposure over and over again. These are things that you want to look for when it comes to these chemicals. And you think, well, it's not really that dangerous. It might just cause a slight irritation. But, you know, over a long period of time with a repeated exposure, it may have a problematic effect on you. Next. When it comes to cleanup, we need to make sure that we follow the recommendations with a PPE. You know, we don't want to just give up after we turn the sprayer off. We've got to have that protection still with gloves, rubber boots, and a chemical suit if necessary. And then especially we want to make sure that when we're completely finished that we wash our hands and face with soap and water. And then your PPE, if it's not contaminated, it needs to be stored in a clean, dry location, not with your pesticides. And that way you can make sure that that suit is not contaminated with vapors or anything else from improper storage. Next. And the washing machine. You know, I tell folks, yeah, you can buy a Tyvek suit, and it may be easier just to purchase that and not worry about having to thoroughly clean your clothes in the washer. And again, this is the same washing machine that your family laundry is also washed in. In a heavily soiled or contaminated clothing item, you may have to rinse out or clean the washer 2 or 3 times after you try to wash chemicals out of contaminated clothing. So there are some guidelines when it comes to washing pesticide contaminated clothing, and you want to follow those and really consider looking at maybe buying a few of the Tyvek suits, because they're a whole lot cheaper than trying to clean up contaminated clothing articles. Next. And we touched on this earlier, the pollinator protection. This is extremely important, as we know that our pollinators are facing a lot of challenges, not just with pesticides, but things in the environment. And we want to do everything we can to avoid causing problems for the pollinators. And not just our honeybees, but there's a number of beneficial insects that pollinate our crops. And, you know, over 1/3 of the food that we eat is provided by pollinating insects. Without them, we would be missing over 30% of the food that we eat. Next. So there's things such as toxicity to our pollinators with insecticides. We need to know the direct effects of individual pesticides, and they're listed on the label. We've got to know the route of exposure. So even there's such things as drift into colonies. So you don't want to be spraying close to a bee yard. If your neighbor has bees, you absolutely want to stay away from his bee boxes and not be close to them. And if we're treating fields, even close there, we want to make sure that we're avoiding drift. But there's also contact with pesticide residue, contaminated water, even nectar and pollen. So keep all those in mind. Next. So here's a chart that looks at some of the different examples of toxicity. So if you're using a product after blooms, the rate of exposure and risk is lower. But if you're using a product during the bloom of plants, you know, the exposure rate is higher. But then if you use a product that's very toxic to bees, such as a pyrethroid, you can see the toxicity goes up, but using it after bloom, we have reduced our risk. But if we use it during the bloom, toxicity goes up, exposure goes up, and the risk goes up. So we really want to be mindful of applying these pesticides to a crop that is in bloom. Next. So when it comes to protecting our pollinators, we want to make sure that beekeepers, pesticide applicators, and landowners are well aware of this. There's a communication tool that can alert beekeepers in the area. And then there's lists of forage crops used by landowners, government agencies, and utilities to improve quality of pollinator forage. And if you've got some of these crops on your farm that are blooming, you may not want to be spraying insecticides on those at that time. Next. So you only want to use pesticides when necessary. Select pesticides with low toxicity, avoid drift, avoid spraying when conditions favor drift, and do not spray plants in bloom. So those are the real keys when it comes to protecting our pollinators. Next. Again, blooming is the worst time to apply pesticides. And I know we've got to make sure that our crops are protected, but if we have to spray when blooming is occurring, we want to spray before 9 or after 3. That's when the bees are foraging, is between those times. And we could spray when the temperature is below 55 degrees. This may not be ideal for the crop, but it's also when the bees are going to be less active as well. Next, please. So again, the label will have different directions for pollinator protection. And you'll see this emblem with the bee in the triangular shaped square. This shows that there's high bee toxicity with this product, so you have to be even more careful. And there's a lot of directions when it comes to reducing the exposure for bees by using this product. Next. This is the Kentucky Department of Agriculture Pollinator Protection Plan. And you can go on this website and put in your information regarding a chemical application when it comes to applying a pesticide at a certain time. Next. You identify the fields that you're going to be applying, and you just report this when you'll be applying and the location of the fields. And this will alert beekeepers in the area of your intended application. And that will result in a letter. Next, please. And so it is very generic. It shows that there will be a pesticide application at a certain time. And this notifies beekeepers within a 5-mile vicinity of the area. It doesn't list any names, and it also just allows beekeepers to take measures to protect their bees. And if they need to, they can actually block the hive and keep the bees in for a period of time. Next, please. So anything we can do to protect our bees. I always laugh and kind of call them winged livestock. You know, we want to protect our own livestock with anything we're doing, and we need to help protect the winged livestock of other producers. Beekeepers are a very important part of our agriculture production, and we want to help them any way we can. Next. So that concludes our portion with the pollinator protection, our producer safety, and we can add some questions in the chat box if you have anything.
Just a quick reminder, guys, that the bee pollinator is completely anonymous. So when you do that, that's a 2-part series. The beekeepers have to register, and then you have to put that in. That makes everything nice and legal. And make sure you don't wait till the last minute to try to get a respirator this year. With everything going on, it's a little tricky to get them. So just a kind of couple reminders. David remembered the safety data sheets. If you do not have those, you can find them at cdms.net. Just a couple of those housekeeping things. But David, thank you so much for doing that, and I do apologize for my internet.
Well, no problem. Some other things that we did cover, the paraquat training. Again, if you'll just go and type in gramoxone or paraquat in the search bar, the trainings will come up. They're on the internet. You can take those trainings so you'll be certified to use that product this year. And also dicamba, if you plan to use the dicamba herbicide on your crops this year, you also have to have a special training certification for that product. And that is through the companies, and those different companies that will be providing you the product, they can provide you with the training to get that certification. So those are two separate certifications for those different products.
All right, I didn't see that we have any questions. If anybody does, just put them in the chat box. Other than that, we do have one more video to show. It's on reducing pesticide drift. So we'll get started showing that one here in a second. In the meantime, be thinking of any last minute questions you'll have, and we will answer those at the end, and then I will show you the Qualtrics form.
Farms aren't as isolated as they used to be. More and more, their neighbors can be people's homes, natural habitats, or other farms with sensitive crops. Farmers have to be good neighbors and responsible environmental stewards, doing everything possible to reduce pesticide drift. One of the easiest ways to prevent a drift issue is through communication with neighbors. Give them a call, post spray records where interested parties can see them, and work with each other to come to a mutually acceptable agreement. Greenhouses might close vents, residential windows can be closed, and neighboring growers can better plan their spray programs and activities. What's around you when you spray? Under certain conditions, small pesticide droplets can drift over large distances. Whether you are spraying or you use custom applicators, consider creating an awareness map that shows the location of anything that might be negatively affected by drift. That's anything from foraging bees and open water to residential areas or other farming operations. Make sure the person spraying knows where these areas are and can plan accordingly.
Perhaps the easiest drift-reducing modification is changing nozzles. There are lots of choices, but they're not created equal.
This graph shows the drift potential expressed as a percentage of the drift from an extended range flat fan nozzle. This sprayer will produce fine droplets under high-powered lights to show you what you can't see during the day. Air induction nozzles have already been widely adopted on boom sprayers. Here's the same sprayer from before, applying a similar rate but using low drift air induction nozzles. Air induction nozzles don't eliminate drift or permit applicators to spray in poor conditions, but as you can see, they reduce drift significantly. Whether air blast or field sprayer, nozzles should be as close to the target as possible while still within the nozzle manufacturer's guidelines. The further the droplet has to travel to the target, the higher potential there is for evaporation loss. Droplets are also slowed, resulting in the potential of off-target drift. In addition to nozzle choices, modifications can be made to sprayers to keep spray on target. Some modifications include shrouds or deflectors, air assist sleeves, and spray towers, to name a few. Each has benefits and drawbacks. Consider your application equipment and talk to both retailers and growers that have had prior experience.
allowing you to decide what's right for your situation. Spraying in ideal conditions isn't always possible, but sprayer adjustments can extend the window a little. And it's important to know when you can safely spray and when you shouldn't spray. Using handheld weather devices, consulting local forecasts, and checking windsocks can tell you a lot. If the predominant wind is blowing in the direction of a nearby sensitive habitat, if it's too hot or dry, or if there's the possibility of a temperature inversion, don't spray. Be aware of the weather and how it changes throughout the spray day. Remember, drift can happen long after you're done spraying.
Cultural practices can also help reduce the impact of drift. Hedgerows like this are essentially spray filters.
Other practices include observing buffer or no spray zones, which are listed on the product label and can often be reduced using Health Canada's web-based drift calculator. Crop separation, planting, and even the relocation of nearby sensitive areas are sometimes feasible. No amount of drift-reducing equipment will prevent drift entirely. Understanding what causes drift and making educated spray decisions can greatly reduce off-target drift.
All right, that concludes our pesticide program for this evening. Next, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome at this time to come off mute. If not, does any of the agents have anything to say while I pull up the Qualtrics information?
Just a reminder, like Dave said, if you're interested in using paraquat or dicamba products for soybeans, this training does not cover that. You need this training for the completion of the other two trainings, but this does not cover the dicamba or paraquat.
Okay, sorry, I thought I was talking to y'all and I was on mute. I've put the Qualtrics survey in the chat. I'm also going to pull up here a QR code for anybody who wants to scan it with their phone. Make sure you complete every aspect of this. This form is going to be how we're able to make sure that our office assistants are able to get your new cards to you. So it'll ask you for your name, address, all that fun stuff. And then I'll ask if it's a recertification or a new one. That's a box to click as well. So make sure you complete the entire survey, get all the way through it, and make sure you get a completed sign or screen on your phone or on your computer. That will make sure that you have completed it thoroughly, and we will get the information from that. So we will use that information. We'll compare it also with our report from this evening. Like I told you all at the beginning, we are able to see how long everybody was on. So if you were on for just an hour or something like that, you probably aren't going to get credit for this evening. So make sure that you complete this. We're asking for it to be completed no later than by close of business tomorrow, which is Friday. It's very important to get this wrapped up and taken care of. So I'm going to stop recording right now, and then I will